should have trusted my gut and turned back when the snow started. That storm was the kind of heavy, smothering whiteout that eats headlights and makes silence feel alive. But Darren insisted we'd be fine. He always had that cocky tone, like nothing could go wrong. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. Me, Darren, and our two friends, Cass and Mark. The cabin belonged to Mark's uncle, an old hunting place tucked in the Rockies. No cell service, no neighbors, no roads once the snow got too deep. Just us, whiskey, and a wood-burning stove. Darren called it off-grid relaxation. I called it a recipe for nerves. The drive up took longer than expected. We reached the cabin just before dark, the storm already thickening. The place was rougher than we expected. Drafty, old wood, a roof that groaned with the wind. Still, we were grateful for the warmth of the stove and the stockpile of wood Mark's uncle had left. We cracked beers, made spaghetti, and tried to pretend the howling outside wasn't unsettling. That first night, I woke to something strange. Not the storm, it had quieted. What woke me was footsteps. Crunching snow circling the cabin. I lay frozen on the couch, listening. They stopped, then started again. Then, clear as anything, a knock on the wall. Not the door, the wall. 3 sharp raps against the logs. I waited for Darren to stir, but the others slept. Eventually, the sound faded, and I convinced myself it had been a branch or drifting snow. The next morning, I found tracks. Boots. They went from the tree line to the cabin, circling around and stopping under the kitchen window. Hunter, maybe, Mark shrugged when I pointed them out. But there were no other cabins for miles, and no truck tracks, no snowmobile, just boots. We stayed inside that day, playing cards, drinking, trying to ignore the unease. But I noticed something while washing dishes. Our knives. The biggest one was missing from the rack. I searched the counters, the sink, even the woodpile. Gone. That night, Cass woke us all up screaming. She swore she'd seen someone looking through the bedroom window. We rushed outside with flashlights. Nothing but endless snow, our own breath steaming in the air. But the tracks were there again, fresh ones. This time, closer. We argued inside. Mark said it had to be some local, maybe drunk, maybe lost. Darren wanted to wait it out, not risk getting stranded trying to hike down. Cass was panicking. I wanted to leave, but the storm was worsening, no chance of moving the car. So we stayed. On the third night, we lost power. The wind howled, the cabin creaked, and we huddled by the stove in the dark. At some point, a sound cut through the storm, a door slamming. The back door. We had locked it. I grabbed the fireplace poker. Darren grabbed a flashlight. The beam swung through the cabin, catching something that froze us. The back door was wide open, snow blowing in. "Stay here," Darren hissed, stepping forward. But when he reached the door, it slammed shut in his face. We tore through the cabin after that, checking closets, under beds, the cellar hatch. Empty. But when I turned, I saw something carved into the wooden wall by the kitchen. Fresh, the cuts still raw. 4 inside, 1 out. We barely slept. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every gust felt like breath on the glass. Sometime before dawn, Darren shook me awake. "Where's Mark?" He was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty. His boots were missing. We searched the cabin, screaming his name. The only answer was the storm. Then Cass found the blood. A thin trail on the floorboards, leading from the sleeping area to the back door. The same door that had slammed itself shut. We followed it outside, flashlights cutting through the snow. The tracks led into the tree line. Halfway across the yard, something glinted. It was the missing kitchen knife, stuck upright in the snow. The blade was red. Cass broke down after that. She wanted to run, to hike out despite the storm. Darren tried to keep control. "Mom," but I saw the fear in his face. We barricaded the doors and windows, sat with our backs to the stove, and waited. Hours passed. The storm quieted, and then we heard it. A whistle, low, steady, circling the cabin. Cass started sobbing. Darren gripped the poker so hard his knuckles whitened. I just sat there, shaking, as the whistle faded and silence returned. When morning came, we found the carving had changed. 3 inside, 2 out. We didn't last much longer. Darren tried to take control, insisted we could defend ourselves. But sometime that afternoon, he opened the cellar door. I don't know why. Maybe he heard something. Maybe he just snapped. He never came back up. We called for him until our voices broke. Finally, I worked up the courage to look. The cellar was dark, the air damp and foul. My flashlight beam swept over stone walls, old crates, and blood smeared across the steps. "No, Darren." I slammed the hatch shut and dragged a chair over it. Cass and I sat together, clinging to each other like kids. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us wanted to. That night was the last. I woke to cold air. The front door stood open, snow swirling in. Cass was gone. Her boots, her coat, gone too. On the wall, fresh carving. 1 inside, 3 out. I didn't move. I sat by the stove until dawn, too numb to cry. When the storm broke, I stumbled out, boots crunching in the snow. The world was blinding white. No sign of Cass, no sign of Darren, no sign of Mark, just silence. I walked until I reached the road. A passing plow driver found me, half frozen, mumbling nonsense. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I don't feel lucky, because sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that whistle. I've spent my life guiding tourists in the Rockies, but last winter was the first time I truly felt hunted. It started with a simple job. A woman named Ellen hired me to escort her and her teenage son, Jacob, up to an old ranger watchtower her late husband used to maintain. She wanted one last weekend there before selling the land. The tower had been converted into a cabin, still rustic, but with enough comforts for a few nights. We snowshoed in, dragging sleds with supplies. The tower sat above a steep ridge, tall windows facing the forest. It should have felt safe, but the moment I stepped inside, I had the uncanny sense of being watched. The first night passed quietly. We made stew, played cards. Ellen told stories about her husband, about how he'd loved the silence up here. But Jacob barely spoke. He kept drifting to the windows, staring out into the black pines. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of wood cracking. At first, I thought it was the fire. Then I saw Jacob at the window. His pale face was pressed to the glass, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't answer, just lifted a finger and pointed toward the tree line. I squinted, heart thudding. For a second, I thought I saw something move between the trunks, a darker shadow in the dark. Then it was gone. The next morning, I brushed it off as imagination. But Jacob was jittery. He asked if anyone else could be up here, hikers or hunters. I told him not in this weather, not this high. He didn't look convinced. That afternoon, Ellen asked me to chop wood. I stepped out, axe in hand, the cold biting hard. That's when I saw them. Tracks in the snow. Not animal, boots. They led from the forest to the base of the tower. Then they stopped. No return trail. I forced myself to stay calm when I told Ellen. She paled but said nothing. Jacob overheard. He just muttered, "I knew it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the tower felt amplified. Around 3 a.m., Jacob shook me awake. "They're closer," he whispered. I followed his gaze to the window. Down below, half buried in snow, stood a figure, motionless, head tilted up toward us. Too far to make out details. I reached for the lantern, but Jacob grabbed my arm. "Don't shine it," he hissed. We watched in silence. The figure never moved, never flinched, just stared up at the tower. After what felt like hours, I blinked, and it was gone. By morning, I doubted myself again. Maybe the storm played tricks with shadows, but when I stepped outside, I froze. At the base of the tower, carved deep into the wood, were words, "You're not alone." I felt sick. I urged Ellen to pack up, to hike back down, but she refused. "We came here for closure," she said, gripping her son's hand. "We're not leaving." That night, the tower shook. Something heavy slammed against the walls, rattling the glass. Ellen screamed, clutching Jacob. I grabbed the axe and braced the door. A scraping sound followed, metal on wood, dragging slowly along the siding. Then silence. We stayed awake until dawn, hearts pounding. On the 4th day, Jacob vanished. One moment he was sketching in his notebook. The next, the door creaked open and cold air rushed in. By the time I got there, he was gone. His boots and coat were missing. We followed his tracks into the trees, calling his name until our voices broke. The trail went half a mile before ending at a hollow tree. Inside, we found his coat. Nothing else. Ellen collapsed in the snow, sobbing. I dragged her back to the tower as the storm rolled in. That night was the worst of my life. I woke to whispers. Ellen sat upright, eyes glazed, murmuring Jacob's name. She stumbled to the window, pressed her hand to the glass, and whispered, "He's here." I looked. My blood froze. Figures. Not one, but 5. Standing in a wide circle around the tower. Motionless, faces hidden by snow hoods, each holding something long in their hands, axes, spears, I couldn't tell. We were surrounded. Ellen opened the door before I could stop her. She screamed Jacob's name into the wind and ran into the storm. I didn't follow. I couldn't. By morning, the figures were gone. Ellen never returned. I stumbled out, half mad, half frozen. No tracks in the snow but mine. No sign of Jacob, no sign of Ellen. Just the carving on the wall, deeper now. New words etched beneath the first. Now you're one of us. They found me 3 days later, wandering the road miles down the mountain, frostbitten and delirious. I told the police everything. They didn't believe me. They said Ellen and Jacob probably got lost in the storm, that the carvings were old. But I know what I saw. I've worked search and rescue for 7 years in Montana. The case I'm about to tell you about didn't make the papers, and officially, it never happened. But I can't keep carrying it alone. Last January, a call came in about a missing group of college kids. 4 of them, all juniors from out of state, had rented a cabin near Flathead Lake for a long weekend. They weren't answering their phones, and when one kid's mom hadn't heard from him in 3 days, she called it in. The blizzard that week was brutal. Roads were closed, and we had to snowmobile most of the way. By the time we reached the property, it was near dark. The cabin sat alone, half buried in drifts, smoke still curling faintly from the chimney. That detail haunts me. It meant the fire was recent. We split into pairs and went in. The first thing that hit me was the silence. Not quiet like a normal cabin in snow. This was wrong. No creaks, no dripping melt, no wind. Just silence pressing against my eardrums. Inside, the place was wrecked. Furniture overturned, food rotting on the table, blood streaks on the floorboards. Not pools, not splatter, streaks like something heavy had been dragged. We called out. No answer. We swept the rooms one by one until we reached the back bedroom. That's when Torres, my partner, froze. There were 3 sleeping bags laid out on the floor. Inside each one was a body, curled tight, zipped up to the neck. Their faces were gray, lips cracked, eyes open. They weren't frozen solid. They'd been alive not long ago. But here's the part that twists my stomach. Their hands were bound inside the bags. Each zipper had been secured with wire. They hadn't climbed in voluntarily. They'd been put in there. 3 kids, not 4. We radioed for backup, but the storm cut our signal. We had to keep looking. In the main room, Torres found something taped to the wall. Pages ripped from a notebook, covered in frantic handwriting. I only read a few lines before he tore them down. It won't stop if we make noise. Don't talk. Don't cough. It's outside waiting. We tried to keep still. When we sleep, it moves closer. We should never have looked in the attic. I wish I hadn't read that. We checked the attic hatch. It was open. The ladder was pulled down, and the snow from the storm had blown in, dusting the floor. But the strangest thing was the smell. Metallic, rotting. Torres climbed first, flashlight sweeping. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I went up and saw it too. The missing 4th kid sat against the far wall, knees to chest, eyes staring. His face was pale blue, frost rhyming his hair. His mouth was sewn shut with fishing line. Crude, uneven stitches, lips puckered and torn. His hands were raw, shredded from clawing the wood. He wasn't moving, but his eyes were open. I told myself he was dead. I told myself that as hard as I could. But when Torres leaned closer, the boy's chest shifted. Just barely. He was breathing. We rushed him down, cut the line from his lips. He didn't scream, didn't speak. He just stared at the windows like a rabbit frozen before a hawk. When we asked who did this, he shook his head violently, like even acknowledging it would bring something down on us. We tried to get him bundled for transport, but the wind outside roared and the walls seemed to shudder. That's when we heard it, a knock, soft, deliberate, on the cabin wall. We froze. The boy went rigid, eyes wide. He shook his head again, faster this time, tears streaming silently. Torres raised his rifle. I gripped the axe I'd found near the stove. The knock came again, closer to the window this time. Then on the roof. Then, God help me, right above the attic hatch. We didn't wait. We dragged the boy out into the storm, snow blinding us. We hauled him on the sled, pushed the snowmobiles harder than I thought possible. I didn't look back until the cabin was just a shadow in the white. He didn't make it. By the time we reached base, his body was cold. Not frozen, cold, like something had sucked the heat right out of him. The coroner's report listed hypothermia. That's the official word. But I know better, because when we unzipped his coat, tucked into the lining was one last notebook page, written in his bloody handwriting. If you hear it, don't move. If you see it, don't speak. If it knows you're awake, it will take you. I still dream of that silence, of the knock on the wall, and of those sleeping bags, zipped tight, bodies shifting just enough that I couldn't tell if they were really dead. I've been on dozens of rescues since, but I won't go back to that ridge.